Okay, today we're going to continue on and with our research class and kind of follow right along with the research methods, chapter 5 in the book there, the literature review process. And so there'll be more pull some things in from other texts and some things that I've done that have worked and some things that I've done that didn't work. But hopefully this will kind of give you a good idea on how you can go about doing your lit review and basically just some things to kind of help you when you start to put this thing together. So the first question you have to answer is, what is a literature review? And pretty much it is when you take your topic and then you read everything there is to read about your topic. You look at everything as far back as you want to go, focusing kind of on the more recent things, as well as anything that's non-peer reviewed, non-journal, and we'll kind of get into that. Pretty much what has already been published. You're looking for anything and everything that can support what you're looking for and to make sure that someone else hasn't already done your study. It's very much a historical review. So again, this tells you kind of what you're doing, what has been done, why you want to do it. If you do your lit review the right way, when you finish, you're going to be considered the quote-unquote expert in that field. And the expert in knowing what's already been done, so that when people can ask you, well, has this ever been done? You can say, well, actually, so-and-so and so-and-so in 2012 did this, and they were able to see that, and they're not da-da-da-da-da, and so you can kind of figure out what's going on and explain that by using those specific examples. Now, the significance of doing a lit review is very good because the lit review can tell you a lot of things. One, it can tell you what has worked and what hasn't worked. Because remember, when you're doing research, it doesn't always happen positively. You don't always prove your theory to be true. You don't always come out the way that you want it to. You may look at different methods, and we've previously talked already about how you may have an idea and someone else had the same idea, but you both want to go about it different ways. Well, if they've already gone about it one way, you can do it your way and follow the same kind of path that they did, and you can compare those results. When you think about anticipating and finding mistakes, anytime that someone else has done something research similar and said, by the way, make sure that you don't do this, make sure that you don't, here are the potholes you may fall into. Those are great because then you have an opportunity to not repeat those mistakes. It's great to be able to do that. And then when you do the lit review from a positive, negative side affecting your research, one, you prevent replication, which we talked about, avoiding mistakes, highlighting weaknesses. But the biggest thing that you can do is the lit review creates the cause that you've been looking for. So it supports and kind of just emphasizes why you're researching what you are. What is your research question? Why did you choose that research question? Well, here you do the lit review, and now you can kind of prove why your research question is a good one. So again, the purpose pretty much is to demonstrate how well you know the subject. And so when I read lit reviews for people, or if I'm reading a paper, if the lit review is very thorough, you know that the researcher or the author knows what they're talking about. It kind of gives you what's already been done. It narrows it down for sure, so you can kind of read through, and then as you read through the literature, you're able to narrow down even further through what's already been done. If there are gaps that are out there, you can identify those gaps, and then maybe you can fill one of those gaps. Maybe you want to try a certain approach, and that approach has been done, and before you just kind of drop back and switch topics altogether, maybe you read through the literature and say, you know what, I wanted to do A, but in wanting to do A, I couldn't, but you know what, there's a gap between D and E, and let's try to figure that out. So, take advantage of that. The literature will help support or develop a hypothesis. And so when you kind of can come out and say, what will happen, this is what I think is going to happen, well, the literature review is going to basically what's already been done, allow you to kind of predict based on what you've read and what you already know. And again, we've kind of talked about methodologies and which ones will and will not work. And then when you start looking at variables, what variables are out there, look at what other people have done. If you're doing a research topic on fan violence, then what have other people looked at? What have other research studies looked at as far as tried to control this, we tried to control that. Maybe the result was the effect of A, B, C, or D. Well, look at those because that helps you identify which variables you might want to use in your study. So once you kind of figure out what the literature review is and what you're supposed to do, where do you find the material? Well, first, easy selection are books. Books are great. You can look in textbooks, and if you think about your school textbooks, there's an index in the back, and it has a list of all the people who contributed, and there's boldface words, and there's a glossary where the boldface words are identified. There are operations manuals that you can find for different things, and we'll talk a little bit about that specifically in just a minute. But textbooks are great, but a lot of times they're dated. Remember, a textbook is a collection of research that's already there. So anything new can't be put in the textbook. So remember that. Peer-reviewed journals. Peer-reviewed journals are kind of that's your meat and potatoes. These are your journals where articles have been submitted and they've been reviewed by reviewers looking for good scientific rigor, looking for scientific process, statistical methods. I've reviewed journal articles for a couple of years now, and I know when I read them, I'm looking for the methods. And the methods are the methods sound? Do they make sense? Is what they're looking for in the research question, are they able to prove that? If it's something they can't prove, then again, why did they do the study? I'm looking for a clear introduction that tells me exactly what they want to do. And in the conclusions, I'm looking for some kind of significance for why they did it, whether it be statistical or practical. I kind of go about it maybe a little different than other people. You're blind to the other reviewers, and when I read the comments from other reviewers, sometimes it's purely grammar, syntax, some it's purely positioning and how it's put together. Some it's very much math. Some it's very much they disagree with the content or they disagree with the idea. And again, it's for me, it's not my position to argue their thought of what they want to do unless what they're trying to do just doesn't explain it. Your peer-reviewed journals, though, are going to be your key. You have conference papers. Conference papers are great because you may go somewhere and someone says something at a conference and you write it down. You can go back and use that. You can cite that. You can quote that. You can use that information as long as you cite it that, hey, I was at the 2015 Southeast ACSM meeting in Greenville, South Carolina on March the 3rd and 4th, 2016, and so said this. Well, that's fine. You can do that, and there are ways to do it, and there's examples in the book for how you do that. The internet is kind of where we all go. Everybody goes to Google Scholar, and you just type something in, a bunch of stuff pops up, and you say, oh, here's all the information. Well, when you're going to use websites as citations, if you're going to say, I got this information from X website, there are ways to do that. You guys can look those up, how to do that, using old thesis or old dissertations. When you start scanning through what people have done, especially at ETSU, because there's a lot of research done at ETSU, there's a lot of people receiving their Ph.D.s and doing dissertation, and it's great. And sometimes someone may find something that you can use. I know 2 people in the program that I was in referenced my dissertation in their dissertation. So it's done. It's done often, actually, if someone's doing something research similar to what you're doing. And then you have newspapers and magazines. Newspapers and magazines are great resources, probably not considered your meat and potatoes scientific literature, but that doesn't mean they don't have good information. You may see research in USA Today about a certain statistic in regards to education in a third world country, or water supply, or travel, or fan violence, or fan participation, something with the Olympics when this comes up, comparing countries. And it's not bad. What you have to be careful with is how did the newspaper article come up with the data that they used for this particular graph? Because oftentimes we see graphs and we see statistics in the paper and we take them for face value, when if you read how they determined how they came to that solution, it may not be the most scientific way. And so you have to be careful there. Now, the last thing are trade journals. And at the very beginning, we mentioned operations manuals, or manuals up there next to textbooks. And that's where maybe you're going to reference a manual in how to do something. So if you're working with a force plate, for example, and I reference a lot of sports science stuff because that's what I'm most familiar with. So let's say that you're referencing a sports science journal. Well, if you're talking about calibration of the equipment and your methods or setup of equipment, you can reference the fact that you set up the equipment per instructions in, blah, 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 blah. So you're using the actual instructions from the manufacturer as the justification for why you set your equipment up the way you did. Because someone may come in and they say, well, why did you set this up this way? Why wouldn't you try another way? And your answer is, well, because in my journal, in my instructions, it said to do this. And so then you've got something to stand on as opposed to, well, I like it this way. As far as databases go, times have changed quite a bit. Pretty much Google Scholar, internet searches, that's kind of where we all go. I mean, we rarely are we going to the library, rarely are we, doing these massive searches. Using a bibliography search is very good because you can find a relevant journal article from the past couple of years and look at the bibliography, and you can pull countless articles from that. Oftentimes now, within your searches, you can pull up an article, you can look at a bibliography, find a couple of journal articles that you're interested in, and in the right-hand pane there, it may give you these articles have referenced this same citation. And so now you're getting a constant feed of journal articles that are related in support or non-support of what you want to do. So looking at the bibliography, I think, is very important to kind of look around and see where things are, because if you just go to Google Scholar and start looking, I mean, you are going to spend a lot of time looking around and reading articles. There's a lot of other options that are kind of been around a long time, and you really need to kind of find one that you really like, whether it's Sport Discus, Asia, ProQuest. There's a lot of things out there. A lot of things, and so you need to find one and you need to get comfortable with one. It's not to say that one is really, really good and one is really, really bad. It's to say that whichever one you pick, you need to be good at. It's kind of like a citation manager. If you don't have a citation manager, you need to find one and get good at it. If you've been using EndNote forever, then use it. If you've been using Zotero, use it. Okay, Mendeley is what we offer here. I've reposted the instructions and some videos of how to do that. If you don't have anything, use that, because that's what's available here on campus right now. Now, when you initially start to organize this, you look at everything. Okay, so now we kind of get into what to do. So we're looking at everything. We're kind of breaking down your area, whatever it is. Like, let's say, okay, so for me, my dissertation was on ACL reconstruction, return to play. Okay, so I can look up everything there is to know about ACL reconstruction, the types of surgery, what options, surgical options. We've got patella tendon graft, we've got hamstring graft, we've got cadaver graft, we've got synthetic. So we have everything I can find under those categories. And then I've got return to play. Okay, so return to play testing. So I can say what return to play tests are out there. And so I may have the jump, the single leg hop test, I may have isokinetic testing, I may have KT 1000, 2000 testing, and then I've got to come up with rehabilitation programs. What rehabilitation programs are out there? And so you look at all the research behind all the rehabilitation programs. And so within those, each one of those, I have all kinds of information. Don't worry about being so specific when you find things, because you may find articles that are for, may find that are against, but I'm trying to gain as much information as I can initially so that I can begin to narrow this thing down. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can go about this. The yellow pad way, which is totally what I've called it, it's absolutely the most, it's easy. I mean, it's the non-digital way to do this. You could create a chart, which is great, and I'm going to show you an example of that. But there's other ways. However is best for you to write down this information. For some of you, it may be getting a big dry erase board and just writing all over it. I don't know. The yellow pad way worked for me. The chart may work for you. Okay, here's an example of this chart, okay, and I'm going to talk over this as you have it on the screen here. So if you're going to look at a whole lot of different studies, one way, if you look at the top row, you've got the study, which is going to be the person's name and the year that it was done, the problem statement, so what was the focus of this study, what was the participant description, so this is basically who the participants were, what was the sample, how did they do it, what was their procedure, and then what did they find, or what were their conclusion? And so you can see that we have the study by Smith, Johnston, Andrews, and Mitchell. All of those are kind of plus or minus 4 or 5 years, early 1978, late 1989. All are focused on exercise on body fat, exercise on body fat, exercise on body fat, workload on body fat. Okay, your participants, your range there, you've got 24-year-old high school males in the last one, but the other ones are college-age males. Okay, so you've got a good grouping in those first 3 studies. The first 2 studies involve underwater weighing. The third one is skin fold calipers. Now, you may say, one of the things that I'm just going to tell you is you have underwater weighing, bioelectrical impedance, skin fold. What's been shown time and time again is you can have all the fancy stuff you want, but the skin fold calipers are going to be just as accurate as any of the other ones. You can do the high underwater weighing, you can do that. So you may find an article that compares instruments used to compare body fat, percent body fat. And in that, you're going to find that skin fold calipers are just as effective as bioelectrical impedance and underwater weighing, and it's super cheap. Okay, you have one person doing body fat as opposed to having a big tank of water and having to get instructions and teach the person how to do it. So that again is going to come out in your lit review. The procedure and design, again, those are the types of things that we're doing. The first one was an exercise design. The second one is a jog. The third one is a jog. Okay, the last one is bicycling. So right off the bat, they're high school males. They're using a bicycle. The other ones are all college age and they're all jogging or some kind of exercise. Didn't specify the exercise, but it's what it is. And then the findings. This is great. This for me would have been hard. I mean, this would have been something I would have done after the fact. For you, this may make total sense. You may look at this chart and say, I'm copying that. I can do that. That makes total sense to me. And that's okay. I think that's great because it gives you, if you look at this, one row is a complete snapshot of that article. And that tells you what you want to know. Now, the problem that I have with it is in that article, there are things that you might want to use or write down, and there's not a place to put it. So that's the only issue is this is a great article for the high points, but the way that I did it, I'll kind of show you, is a little bit different that picks all that up. So with the yellow pad method, and again, that's totally just a made up name. You could use the white pad or the blue pad or the red pad or what color paper you have laying around. I may have 10 of these yellow pads spread out. And on each one of them, before I get started, I come up with my outline topics. And just like I explained earlier, I may have one on ACL, bone, patella tendon, bone surgery. And then I'll have another one on hamstring graft. I have another one on cadaver graft. And then I have one on return to play following hamstring, return to play bone, patella tendon, bone, return to play other. I may have one on outcomes, success rates following surgery, length of time in surgery. Then I'll have return to play, single leg hop, return to play, isokinetic testing. And as I read an article and I come across something that I like that's going to fit on one of my yellow pads, I'll highlight it, and then I will write on the yellow pad that corresponds to that area, Smith 2012, bone, patella tendon, bone procedure rehab typically lasts 2 to 3 hours, and the success rate is 90%. And so I'd write that. And so when I finish reading my articles, I'm going to have yellow pads, and underneath bone, patella tendon, bone procedure, it may have 15 or 20 things, maybe more, that are just related to that specific topic. So now when I go back to start writing, and I'm going to write the paragraph on bone, patella tendon, bone procedure, I have all this information already on the yellow pad. Okay? Sometimes this gets messy because you got stuff scribbled all over. And as I would go through, I've got all these yellow pads spread out all across the room. I got papers everywhere. I forget where I put things. Ultimately what worked for me was I took an entire day and I started and just went off, just highlighting everything, writing all this stuff down. And when I got finished, I took all the journal articles and put them away because I didn't want to have to, I wanted to use the notes that I took, because what happened is I wrote it all down and then I found myself going back into the articles. And so I had papers spread out all over the place. Now, one article may have information on 5 of those yellow pads. And so that's where the chart method is tough, because each one is kind of one row. But there are bits and pieces of these articles that may fit into the categories. So if you're going to use the yellow pad method, be organized, okay? And trust what you write down, okay? And trust what you write down. Again, you can do whatever you want, but some bad options are just basically going to Google and typing some generic thing that's not really related to your topic. Just kind of randomly searching through. Have a plan. Because when you start randomly doing things, you're going to come up with random stuff that really doesn't help you. And the reader's going to pick up on it. You're going to have a hard time writing your paper. I'm going to be honest with you. If you do that chart or you do the yellow pad deal, when it comes time to write, everything you need is already there. And so instead of it being in 100 journal articles, it's going to be right there, right where you need it, maybe on 1 or 2 pages. When you don't write down what you read, that's when you get in trouble. When you're not using a citation manager to pull that article in so that when you need to go back to it, it's right there. That's a bad plan. And then again, just purely not using citation software. I'm going to tell you, I tried to use Zotero and I got screwed up and I wound up doing mine by hand. And so I'm going to tell you that I had 47 pages of citations in my dissertation when it finally went to print. And every time that I had to change one of those, I had to go back in the entire document and change it all by hand. And it is doable, obviously, but it's a pain and it's not worth it because since then I've written 2 or 3 papers and used the citation manager, and I'm embarrassed to tell you that I didn't do it. Initially I did. It was great and I was using it, and then something happened. I can't even remember how I got screwed up, but all my stuff was gone. And so lesson learned. I'm passing that information on to you from someone who's been burned. Don't get burned. Now, when you do your lit review, what exactly are you going to be looking for? Well, you're going to be looking for 2 things. You're going to look for primary literature and secondary literature. Well, the primary literature, that's your firsthand original source of data. So you may have the original data or original example. For me, Lockman. Lockman is a test for ACL integrity. Well, if I look for a citation that supports the use of the Lockman exam in the 2000s, that's probably a bad plan because the actual Lockman test goes way back, way back. And that's where we get into secondary literature, because this is kind of the most common thing. So I'll read an article about evaluating the knee, and they'll talk about the Lockman exam, and that's fine. And there'll be 4 or 5 citations after that. And I'll go back in the bibliography, and there'll be one of them that's like 1948. Well, if I go back to that article, you know what? That's the original article where they came out and said something about the Lockman exam. And so that's your primary literature. It's found oftentimes in secondary literature. We're at a point in the world right now where us writing primary literature probably ain't going to happen. Every now and then something new comes along, but as a general rule, we're pretty much writing secondary literature using primary literature to support it. Textbooks, encyclopedias, and all that, those are secondary literature because remember, they're collections of work that's already been done. So remember, primary supports the secondary, but the secondary is what we read and what we use all the time. A lot of times you go back and try to read the primary literature and it's awful. It's hard to read. It wasn't written for you. It was written for, a bunch of dudes in a stuffy room who wanted to just show off. So a lot of that old stuff is old stuff, and it is what it is. So the secondary literature that's out now, the audience is very targeted, and it's much easier to read. So let's kind of get into this here. Step 1 is doing the research question. Well, you know what? You guys have already done it. You guys have been through it. That assignment's due the end of the month. When you begin your lit review, again, this is a great opportunity for you to restate the problem that you want to research. So you're going to outline what you're going to show, and once you figure that out, you write about this, you already know because your outline are basically the headings of all those yellow pads or the common theme in your chart that you're going to use when you start collecting this information. Now we get to step 2. Well, step 2 is when you consult your secondary resources. And so this is great because you can find meta-analysis or research reviews. You're going to look at recent literature on your topic and figure out what's out there in the past few years. And then you use the bibliography to trace back to your primary stuff. Don't leave anything unturned. Basically, look for everything. Look for everything that you can possibly think of and track it down. One thing I will caution you on, do not look at the title of an article and think you know what it's about. Because oftentimes you're going to get confused, you're going to get crossed up, and when you get crossed up, it can actually come back and hurt you really badly because you may use an article to support something that you're going to say, and the article that you use to support it actually contradicts or disproves what you want. And so be very careful. Make sure that you're actually reading the stuff that you're using for your citations. In this secondary search, you can, world books, encyclopedias, textbooks, whatever it is. It's great because if you use a textbook, for it to get in the textbook, it's got to have been well accepted, and there's going to be lots of citation and support for it. Step 3 is when you determine your descriptors. And by that, what are going to be your terms? We've talked about defining terms. With some of you, with your research questions that you've sent me, we've looked at what terms you need to define. How are they going to strengthen your study? Okay, are you sure? Don't assume anything. Make sure that if there is something that could be misunderstood or we could take it this way or that way, make sure that you define it and define it the way you want it. Don't define it the way that somebody else wants it. It's your study. It's your study and it's your criteria. Make sure that you define it the way you want it, because when I ask you about it or someone else asks you about it, you need to be very confident in explaining why it is what it is. When you set your criteria, whether it's inclusion or exclusion, this defines your sample, okay? And this is critical. We've talked about this. You've read about this. Critically defining who is in and who's out makes or breaks the study. It also makes or breaks the studies that you can use to compare. Because if you are doing a study focused on 18 to 22-year-old male and female college students, and you compare that to a study that used 60 to 65-year-old male and females in a nursing home, people are going to laugh you off out of the business. So you need to be very careful about what you're using to compare and how you're going to determine who's in and out of your study. So step 4, now we've kind of got our secondary stuff figured out. We know what we're going to do. Now we go back to those preliminary sources and we look at our abstracts. Okay, so we look at these abstracts, and you got to be careful because abstracts are abstracts. They're not the actual study. You can read all the abstracts you want, and if someone asks you about them, you can say, hey, I saw this and this, but you're not going to have any details. Okay, you can look at the indexes, you can look at journals, you're going to look at bibliographies. Again, these are great resources. Computer searches. We're going to look at the next slide and kind of look at some examples there, and this is where you get into your primary literature. So now we're kind of really getting into things. When you look at your computer database searches, there's a lot of them. They're listed on this page. I'm not going to read them to you. You use the one that's best for you. Okay. Once you get into kind of the area that you want, there's going to be one of these that's going to kind of highlight and say, wow, if I use this, I'm really going to get some information. You can go in the book and you can read kind of what's appropriate for these particular databases. And then we're going to read and record. And again, this is when you use the chart versus the yellow pad versus whatever it is you choose to do. You may have your own way. You may have 4 or 5 different pages open and you copy paste stuff in, and that's fine. You can do it all electronically. The statement problem, your characteristics of the participants, the instruments and tests, the methods, the treatments applied, the design, statistical analysis, findings, all of this stuff. You need to have all this stuff. If you can find these things in all the papers that you're writing, you're going to have it made. Because when you know what the methods are of each of these papers, you're gold, because you know what you need to do based on what's not done or what worked and didn't work. When you know what treatments were applied, you know whether or not you're duplicating the study. When you know the characteristics of the participants, you know whether you can compare your study to this one or not. So, what the findings are. All of this is all relevant stuff that needs to be done as you're reading these articles. And then the last step is just writing the review. When you get to here, you got it made because you've already done all the hard part. Okay, you have the introduction, you got the body, and then you got the summary and conclusions. The introduction, you know this, okay? It explains the purpose of the review. The introduction tells the reader what you're about to read about. The how, the why, the review of the organization. This is kind of what you want people to read and say, man, I want to keep going, all right? Because when they keep going, it's not the best reading ever, okay? You're focused on reviewing the research question, okay? Don't ramble on in some other direction. Be very focused on what you're doing. Everything that you say relates back to the research question. Be very careful not to ramble, okay? Very careful. Because when you get to the body, what's going to happen is you're going to have an organized presentation of material, which is great. You're going to thoroughly describe the topic. You're going to show pros and cons. You're going to show some that were supportive and some that disproved or were non-supportive of your research question. And what you want to do must be clear and concise. Eliminate all of the opinion, all of the biases, all of the everything. And then if you don't want to read it, no one else is going to want to read it either. So write it in such a way that you're not too wordy, that you're not rambling on, that you're not steering off the path. Everything needs to be absolutely focused in what you're doing. You can do this. Each of you in this class have the ability to do this. Basically, you're telling a story of your area. If you want to do your focus and you want to do your research on social media and how it affects athletics, you're writing a story. And in this story, you're writing a page to make people want to read about the history of social media and athletics. Well, you can do that. Okay, you can do that. This is your sales pitch. Now, your summary and conclusions are kind of the end. It's going to summarize the review, always support your research question, restate the critical support. The things, you don't have to restate all the things that were against you, but, do not be biased. Don't use unclear terminology. Again, I think probably the hardest part, all of you are type A folks, and I'm going to say you're bullheaded about a lot of things because most type A people are. But you really got to be open-minded here. You've really got to open your mind, and you've got to see things very neutral when you're writing this. When you're finished, okay, and this is on page 74, when you've covered the key literature. And the sources used are the sources used by current authors. Well, if they're using them, then I should be using them. Is it up to date? Am I using information that's primary, which is great, but secondary, meaning in the past 2 to 3 years? Did I relate the literature to my research question? Have I included literature that does and doesn't support my topic? Because if you only include the stuff that does support your research question, then it's very much biased, and it's going to be, if I was reading it, I would kick it back, for sure. Have you produced a critical assessment rather than a descriptive review? This is where things get a little hairy because you're writing about something, and so it's easy to say, well, I'm just going to tell what other people did. Well, you've got to put a slant on what other people did, take what they did, and write it of why you want to do what you want to do. Why am I doing this study? Because this guy did this, this guy did this, this guy did this. That's what you have to be, very careful that you're not just writing another review. From an organizational standpoint, does it make sense? That's key. And then pretty much, are your research questions clear? And when I read your lit review, do I know exactly what you want to do? Because if I do, you've done a great job. And if you read it and you can figure it out, that's great. Chances are you will. So give it to somebody else and say, read this lit review and tell me what I'm looking for. And if they can't tell you, first of all, don't get upset if they can't, because they may just really hate your topic. Guide them through it and they'll say, oh, okay, I see. Other potential questions that you might want to know. How long does the lit review have to be? Well, you know what? When it's done, it's done. Sometimes it's, 10 pages. Sometimes it's 200 pages. Some of you have picked some pretty broad topics. You need to thoroughly review the literature. There's no minimal, maximum requirement there. Should you include? Should I include? If you ask that question, you probably should. Okay, is it related to your topic? Well, if it is, then do it. If it's not related to your topic, then don't put it in there. If you're not sure, put it in there. Okay, you should know. There shouldn't be anything that you ask and say, well, I'm not sure if that's really related to my topic. Well, if that's the case and you don't know your topic, when do I use a citation? Well, go back and look when you use citations, because the thing is, anything that you say that you gain knowledge from reading that article, then you need to cite it. So the use of citations, I don't want to spend a lot of time going back and teaching everybody how to do that. You guys can go online and review that information. You can get a Harbrace book and read it. Some of you, I know you hadn't been in it for a while, but the use of citations, you have AMA and APA, you can figure those out. You can look it up. It's very easy to go back and review that. So if you have to ask the question, should I use one, then chances are you probably should. Okay. Now, that really is it. It's really not that hard thinking about it, looking at it on paper. If you do your homework on the front end, reading your articles and getting the information and taking good notes, when you go to write the lit review, it's easy. It really will. It'll start to just flow out. Give yourself an hour and a half to sit down and write it, and I bet you'll be done. I bet you'll be finished, and it will be easy. So this is due the last day of the semester. So right now, there's a rough draft that's open. And A lot of you got really nervous thinking, oh my gosh, this thing's due now, but it's not. Right now, it's the same situation as the research question. If you want to submit it. I'll look at it and give you feedback, tell you what you want. If you want to just email it to me, I'll do the same thing, help you out as much as I can, because we really need to get this. One thing I want to make clear, we're not doing a research project in this class. All we're doing is doing the work, the write-up. If you want to do the research project, after you do the lit review, you're going to know exactly what you need to do. There is no research project in this class, okay? The two main assignments are doing the research introduction and then doing the lit review, okay? For those of you that want to go ahead and do it, we'll talk about it, but you don't have to do it for a grade in this class right now. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that'll ease some stress as we move forward. But, these last two sections, and I'll go ahead and tell you, the next chapter is really focused on theory, and it's primarily reliability and validity. So here's where we get into some math. Here's where we get into to establishing reliability, establishing validity. How do you do it? What are the common methods? Inter-tester reliability versus test-retest reliability. We'll talk about it. We're going to go through it. You're going to use this later on. You're going to use it in analytics class. You're going to use it in your Research 2 class. So it's good to go ahead and have it. But if you have any questions, let me know. The end of the month is when the research question is due, and I've gotten some information from people, and I've kind of relayed that feedback. But again, let me know if I can help you. Thank you.